Hi, my name's Duncan Pritchard. I'm a professor of philosophy here at the University of Edinburgh. And what I'm going to be talking to you about today is knowledge. In the first part of the lecture, I'll be talking to you about the nature of knowledge. What is knowledge? And in the second part of the lecture, I'm going to be talking about whether we have as much knowledge as we think we have. And in particular, I'm going to be introducing you to the problem of radical skepticism, which is the view in its most extreme form that we don't know anything at all. Now, we live in an information age. The very fact that you're taking this massive open online course, this MOOC, is evidence of the fact that information is available to us in a way that it's never been before in human history. And that's a great thing. It's great that there's so much information readily available to the vast majority of the people in the world. But merely having lots of information available to you isn't in itself a good thing unless you know which is the good information, which is the bad information, which is the useful information, which is the useless information. And that's where knowledge becomes extremely important. So it's crucial to us to understand both what knowledge is and also to assure ourselves that we have as much knowledge as we think we do. And to make things a little bit more manageable, we're going to make a simplifying assumption here. We're just going to focus in on a particular kind of knowledge, propositional knowledge, which is knowledge that a certain proposition is the case. So propositional knowledge is often contrasted with ability knowledge or know-how. So examples of propositional knowledge, or knowledge that, as it's known, are things like knowing that Paris is the capital of France, knowing that the Earth orbits the Sun, knowing that one has a toothache. In contrast, examples of ability knowledge or know-how, such things as knowing how to ride a bicycle, knowing how to play the piano, knowing how to beat the stock market. Now, it's a very interesting question now, knowledge that and knowledge how interrelate, but we're not going to get into that question today. We're just going to focus in on knowledge that. Now, most people agree that there are two key ingredients in knowledge that. In particular, if you know that something is the case, then what it is that you know has to actually be the case. So this is the truth condition. So if you know that Paris is the capital of France, then Paris has to be the capital of France. Right? It has to be true that Paris is the capital of France. So if in the last few hours, unbeknownst to me, there's been some edict issued which makes Marseille the capital of France, well then I no longer know that Paris is the capital of France because it's no longer true that Paris is the capital of France. Knowledge requires truth. It also requires belief. That is, it requires you to believe the proposition which is known. So unless I believe that Paris is the capital of France, I'm not even in the market for knowledge, right? Knowledge is a relationship between a person and a fact. And the relationship is at root one of belief. So you believe that something is the case, and it is the case. That puts you in the market for knowledge. There's clearly a lot more to knowing than simply getting it right. That is, there's more to knowing than just having a true belief. You can acquire true beliefs in all kinds of random and haphazard ways. That by itself won't guarantee you knowledge. Imagine two policemen. They both believe that a certain person's guilty of a crime. But in one case, the policeman believes it simply out of prejudice. They haven't looked at the evidence. They've just formed a gut reaction against someone on the basis of prejudice that they're guilty. Now imagine a second detective who believes the person's guilty, but believes that they're guilty because they've actually looked at all the evidence and weighed it up and they've worked out this person has to be the culprit. The detective who bases his belief on prejudice clearly doesn't know. It's just random that he's got things right, that he's chanced on the truth. The detective that's actually done the work of weighing up all the evidence, he does know. So knowing is getting to the truth in the right kind of way. There are various intuitions that are being elicited here about the nature of knowledge. I'm going to mention two of them. They may be well amount to the same thing. They may be two sides of the same coin. The one is that when you know, you get to the truth through your abilities. So think of that detective that sifted through the evidence. He had abilities that he brought to bear which got him to the truth. Unlike the policeman that formed his belief based on prejudice, these abilities didn't play any role in him getting to the truth. And the second intuition, sometimes called the anti-luck intuition, is that when you know, it's not a random matter that you get things right. It's not a matter of luck that you get things right. The detective that believes that the defendant is guilty based on prejudice, it is just a matter of luck that he gets it right. The detective that bases his belief on evidence, it's not a matter of luck that he got things right. It's because he formed his belief in the right kind of way. That's why he's got a true belief. So we need to add something to true belief to get knowledge and to accommodate these intuitions about knowledge, that knowledge requires ability on the part of the subject, that knowledge is getting things right in a way that's not lucky. And the classical answer to the question of what you need to add to true belief to get knowledge is justification. And this is the so-called classical account of knowledge, or sometimes called the tripartite or three-part account of knowledge, and it goes right back to antiquity, back to Plato. So the idea is that when you know, you satisfy three conditions. You have a belief, the belief is true, and you have a justification for that belief. Well, what they mean by a justification is that you can offer good reasons in support of why you believe what you do. So think about our two detectives again. The detective who forms his belief simply on the basis of prejudice, he has no good reasons that he can offer in support of what he believes. In contrast, our detective who's sifted through the evidence and who's come to an appropriate conclusion that this person must be guilty, he can offer all kinds of good reasons in support of his belief. He is justified in believing as he does. Now, until quite recently, until the mid-1960s, most people thought that this was the right way to think about knowledge. Knowledge is just justified true belief. However, in 1963, a man called Edmond Gettier published a paper, about 2.5 pages long, very, very short paper, in which he showed, pretty much convincingly, I think just about everyone agrees now, that he showed that knowledge cannot be justified true belief. Simply, it's not possible. What he did was he gave a series of examples in which you've got a subject who forms a true belief and they have a justification, a good justification in support of what they believe, but where nonetheless it's just a matter of luck that their belief is true. And these are so-called Gettier-style examples. And I'm going to introduce you to a few of them today. If these examples are right, and most people think they are, then it follows there must be more to knowing than simply having a justified true belief. And that prompts a puzzle, because if that's true, then what is knowledge then, if it's not justified true belief? I'm going to focus in on two examples. The first example is the example of a stop clock. Imagine someone who forms their belief every morning about what the time is by looking at the clock, the grandfather clock in their hallways. Never let them down, it's a very reliable clock. Suppose they come downstairs one morning, they see that the clock is saying that it's 7:30, let's say. They form the belief that it's 7:30, and that belief is true. So they believe that it's 7:30 in the morning, and it is 7:30 in the morning. But now suppose that unbeknownst to them, the clock stopped 24 hours earlier. So they've got a belief. The belief is true. Right? It is 7:30. They just happen to look at the clock at the one time in the day when it's showing the correct time. And they've got a good justification for their belief. After all, that's what the clock shows. The clock's a reliable clock. It's never let them down before. And indeed, they've got independent reasons for thinking that the time is roughly 7:30. They've just woken up. They wake up roughly about that time every morning. So they've got a justified true belief. But surely you can't come to know what the time is by looking at a stop clock. And the problem here is that it's just a matter of luck that you happen to chance upon the truth in this case. If you'd looked at the clock a minute earlier or a minute later, you'd have ended up with a false belief. You can't come to know what the time is by looking at a stop clock. So you've got justified true belief, but it's just a matter of luck that your belief is true. So it doesn't count as knowing. Here's another case. This is the sheep case, which is due to someone called Roderick Chisholm. So various people have formulated these Gettier-style cases. This case involves a farmer. He's in a field, he looks across into the other field, and he sees what looks very much like a sheep. So he forms the belief there's a sheep in the field. And indeed there is a sheep in the field. But what he's looking at isn't a sheep. He's looking at let's say, a big hairy dog. Something that looks very much like a sheep, but which isn't a sheep. However, there is a sheep in the field. It's just the sheep in the field is not what he's looking at. There's a sheep in the field hidden from view behind the big hairy dog that he is looking at. So here's the question. Does he know there's sheep in the field? Well, if the classical account were right, it would seem we would have to say that he does know. After all, he believes there's a sheep in the field, and there is a sheep in the field, and he has excellent reasons for believing there's a sheep in the field. I mean, he's a farmer, he can see what looks very much like a sheep in clear view, so he has excellent reasons for thinking there's a sheep in the field. But intuitively he doesn't know there's a sheep in the field because what he's looking at isn't the sheep, right? What he's looking at is the sheep-shaped object which is obscuring the genuine sheep hidden behind. So again, what you've got here is an example where you have a justified true belief, but where nonetheless it's just a matter of luck that the belief is true. So in the case of the farmer, it's only because there happens to be hidden from view a genuine sheep behind the sheep-shaped object that he's looking at, the big hairy dog. It's only because that's the case that happens to have a true belief. There's a general formula to constructing a Gettier-style case. What you do is you take a belief which is justified, but where ordinarily, even though it's justified, the belief would be false. So think about the sheep case. I mean, ordinarily, if you're forming your belief there's a sheep in the field by looking at a big hairy dog, well, although you're justified, you'd end up with a false belief because you're not looking at a sheep. But now what you do is you just add whatever detail you need to add to the example to make the belief true nonetheless, even though the truth of the belief has nothing to do with the justification. So in the sheep case, you just make it that there is a sheep hidden from view behind the sheep that the farm's looking at. You can try the same formula with the stop clock case. I mean, normally, looking at a stop clock, although that would give you good reasons to believe what you do, if you've got reasons to think the clock's working, looking at a stop clock would give you justification, but it wouldn't give you truth, because ordinarily, trying to find out what the time is by looking at the stop clock would give you a false belief. But we can just set up the case so that you happen to look at the clock the one time in the day when it gives you a true belief. And then you've got justification, and you've got truth, and you've got belief, but you've not got knowledge. So how do we deal with Gettier cases? So if knowledge isn't justified true belief, then what is it? Part of the difficulty here is that it's not as if there's a simple patch that one can add to the justified true belief account of knowledge in order to deal with Gettier cases. In the immediate aftermath of Gettier's article, a lot of people tried this. They tried just adding some extra condition to the justified true belief account in order to solve the Gettier problem. But actually all these proposals eventually floundered. There isn't a simple fix. So for example, some people suggested that maybe what you need to add to the classical account, the justified true belief account, is a fourth condition which says that the subject isn't basing their belief on any false assumptions. So on this view, knowledge would involve truth, belief, justification, and also a further fourth condition that there be no false assumptions or lemmas, as they're sometimes called, in play. This might work for some Gettier cases. So it might work for the stop clock case, for example. You might think that there is an assumption in play when you form a belief by looking at a clock that the clock is working. And if you think, well, that's the assumption in play when you form your belief about the time, well, if it's false, then that prevents you from knowing. But in lots of other Gettier-style cases, it's not clear at all that there are any false assumptions in play. Think about the sheep case. I mean, the farmer just simply forms a belief that there's a sheep in the field because that's what he sees. There's not obviously any assumptions in play. And if there are no assumptions in play, then there are no assumptions that can be false. So we encounter a difficulty here. Gettier cases show us that knowledge isn't justified true belief, but it's not obvious then, if it's not justified true belief, exactly what it is. So the Gettier problem raises two interesting questions about the nature of knowledge. I mean, the overarching question it raises is, what is knowledge if it's not justified true belief? But we can break that into some more specific questions that it raises. So, for example, we've been assuming all the way through this that justification is at least necessary for knowledge. That is, that justification is part of what it is to have knowledge. But given that we've rejected the idea that knowledge is justified true belief, maybe we should question that. Maybe we should start to ask whether knowledge is true belief plus something very different to justification. And this goes back to a further issue, which is that, remember we talked about the anti-luck intuition. We talked about how when you know, you get things right and it's not a matter of luck. We thought that justification, having a justified belief, was a way of excluding that kind of luck. So when you have a justified belief, then when you get things right, it's not a matter of luck that you get things right. But Gettier cases show us that that's not the case. You can have justification, you can have true belief, and yet it still be a matter of luck that you've got a true belief. So that raised the question, what is it then that excludes that kind of luck? What is it that we need to add to true belief to exclude that kind of luck if it's not justification? So here are the conclusions to part one. We've been looking at the nature of knowledge, and we've drawn three conclusions in essence. The first is that knowledge isn't justified true belief. We thought it was. It looked very plausible that it ought to be. But the moral of the Gettier case is that it can't be, because you can have justified true beliefs, and yet your true belief simply be a matter of luck, and you don't get to knowledge through luck. The second conclusion is that it's not obvious that you can simply add something to the justified true belief account of knowledge to solve the problem. That it's not as if there's just some obvious way of just adding an extra condition to the classical account to make it avoid Gettier cases. And then that leads us to a third and quite profound conclusion, which is that therefore it's not that obvious what knowledge is.